Welcome back. Turning now to the governor's race. Later in the show, we'll have my interview with Andrew Gillum. But first, I sat down with Ron DeSantis Thursday morning. He had been with President Trump in Estero, Florida the night before. And so that's where we started. What's it like being up there for one of those things?
Well, I mean, in terms of politics, there's just nothing like it. I mean, I spoke for Romney in 2012, not even close to that. And the thing is, I was talking to Secret Service. You know, they could, if they could do the security, they could probably have 100,000 people at some of these things, but certainly 40, 50,000, because, I mean, these people line up all day to be able to get in there. So a lot of those folks were fired up. And I think that, you know, midterm elections usually aren't as good a turnout, but we're turning out more voters even than the presidential right now. And I think he's a big reason why on the Republican side.
So there was never a hesitation on your part to have the president come in. Sometimes people like to debate whether or not the president in a purple state is a good thing or a bad thing. No hesitation on your part.
No, because for governor, you know, I'm not going to be in the Washington food fight every day. I've been there, done that, got that T-shirt. I'm going to have to look out for Floridians, and to do that, you have to work constructively with the administration on our water resources, Everglades restoration, Lake Okeechobee, transportation, which is obviously important in South Florida, and we need to get more resources for that. The military footprint. I mean, Southern Command here in Miami, other places, Northwest Florida. I think Floridians want the governor to work constructively with the administration, not to be kind of the font of the resistance. You know, you'll get more airtime on CNN doing that, but you're not going to be able to advance Floridians' interests, and I'll be able to do that.
We heard many of the same things we hear at a lot of Donald Trump rallies across the country. A new variation, though, was the lock him up theme when it came to Andrew Gillum. What did you think of that?
Well, look, that's just how the crowd goes. But I think that there are some really significant questions about Mayor Gillum's conduct. Now, he said he's never taken anything in the debate the other night, and then the documents came out 2 days later showing that he got at least $1,000 illegal gift from an undercover FBI agent in New York. The lobbyist who arranged that trip took Andrew on a $1,000 vacation to Costa Rica. And then that same lobbyist, lo and behold, later gets a $2 million contract with the city of Tallahassee. And the undercover FBI agent, new documents last week, underwrote a $4,300 dinner for Mayor Gillum's nascent governor campaign. So he says somehow there's no investigation into him. Why would an undercover agent be greasing his palms like that if he wasn't being investigated?
I just want to go back to the lock him up chant for just a second, because we've heard a lot of talk about how we need to lower some of the rhetoric in the campaigns, especially given what came out of South Florida with individuals sending package bombs through the mail to critics of the president, or people that the president has criticized. Is the lock him up chant, though, appropriate?
Well, maybe not, but I think people do want these politicians to be held accountable. And I'm sick of, and I think people are sick of, people in office thinking they don't have to live by the same rules as everybody else. I think that was a problem with Hillary Clinton, and I think we're seeing that is a problem with Andrew Gillum, with not being willing to take responsibility, you know, accepting thousands of dollars of illegal gifts, and then doing favors for the same lobbyist who arranged those gifts.
You said in the rally, this is a guy, referring to Andrew Gillum, who took bribes. That's a strong accusation. He has not been charged with anything. He says he's not under investigation. The FBI has not acknowledged.
He also said he's never accepted anything, and we know that's not true. So here's the thing. We know that he accepted this stuff. We know it was not legal in Florida law, the gifts. The question is, then he turns around and provides this $2 million. So to me, that is kind of what municipal corruption is. He's getting stuff he shouldn't have, and then he's turning around and giving the lobbyists exactly what they wanted.
As you were driving in, I was watching Andrew Gillum was appearing on MSNBC. You were on Fox and Friends this morning. He was on MSNBC this morning. One of the things he said is that we're referring to Republicans and yourself, that you're not trying to convince people to vote for them. They're trying to convince voters to vote against me. Is that what the argument is? Is that you have more to fear from Andrew Gillum, so you need to vote for me?
No, I think it's both. I mean, my vision is let's build off the success Florida's had economically. I don't think we've reached our economic potential. I think we have a historic opportunity to drive record investment into Florida, and I think South Florida is really going to lead the way on that. If you look at the financial services opportunities, technology, those are high-paying jobs. That's building an economy for the long haul. We can do that. Obviously, Andrew wants a 40% tax increase. That's going to cost jobs, cost business, and prevent investment from coming in. And so it is a choice, but man, I'm happy on running on a strong economy. I'm happy running on good education reform, and I'm happy of having taken the lead on fighting to help fix Lake Okeechobee and restore the Everglades. It's important stuff.
I just want to ask you, what happens the day after the election? Because we're going to end up with a situation where half the state is going to be unhappy with the choice. If you're elected, people on the Andrew Gillum side are going to think that they have somebody who's a possible racist, who's a Trump acolyte. If you win, the people on the Andrew Gillum side, or rather, if Andrew Gillum wins, the people on your side are going to think that he's a cop-hating socialist who is going to undermine the entire economic system of the state. Is it so charged that come the day after the election, are you at all worried what happens the day after the election? I'm not talking about violence or anything like that. I'm just talking about trying to come together as a state to solve problems.
Well, I'm prepared to lead. I mean, if you look at the core planks of my agenda, we talked about the economic opportunities, education, vocational and technical training back in the schools. That has broad bipartisan support. The environment and water quality, which is really a pressing issue, that has broad bipartisan support. I'll be pointing good, solid judges to the courts, and I will be standing by law enforcement, which has broad bipartisan support. So I think that the agenda will be one that will be very positive, and I think it can bring people together. But I would say, I mean, the charges against me, I mean, that's political garbage, to be honest. Andrew has signed a pledge attacking the police. I mean, he did that. That's just a fact. He is running on the largest tax increase in history. He is running on basically a single-payer health system, which would end Medicare and Medicare Advantage and end employer-provided insurance. Those are just facts.
But how do you bring people together? Like, for instance, you know, Andrew Gillum will probably get upwards of 90% of the African-American vote. This has been a racially charged election, whether fairly or unfairly directed towards you. What do you do the day after the election if you're elected to reach out to the African-American community?
Everyone will get a fair shake with me being governor, and I'm going to specifically support programs that have been successful that have disproportionately helped African Americans, such as Step Up for Students, which I think has had enormous success. I was able to visit a school in Orlando, probably 90% African American. I had single moms coming to me in tears with how happy they were that they finally found a school that worked for their child.
That's a charter school, though, correct?
It was a private school, with a Step Up for Students scholarship. So those are things, you know, if that's working, we need to stand by those families, particularly the low-income single moms who are working hard to try to give their kids opportunities, and that will happen regardless of race.
I want to ask you, just obviously something that was touched on in the rally, talking about the president talked about birthright citizenship. Do you believe that the president has the ability through executive order to do away with birthright citizenship?
I don't know that he can do that. You know, I think as a policy matter, birthright citizenship, you know, doesn't make sense when it's applied to someone could be a tourist, be in our country for a month, give birth, and then leave, and then the person's a citizen.
You're a Harvard Law School graduate. Right. Do you think that it's constitutional for the president to be able to just?
I don't think the question has ever fully been. I think most court decisions have gone in the direction of anyone born on the soil as a citizen, but it has never been finally determined whether someone who's just transiently in the country, whether as a tourist or here illegally, whether that 14th Amendment would apply to that. I tend to think that the original interpretation of that would not apply, but I think most of the court decisions kind of move in the direction where, hey, if you're born here, you do it. But I do think it would be good to have the court finally resolve it. I don't know that he could do it by executive order, but obviously if he did do it, that would be tested immediately, and we would get a resolution.
One of the things that the president touted as well was the new trade deal that he has with Mexico and with Canada. A lot of Florida farmers are unhappy with that deal. They had wanted certain protections, not raising tariffs, but certain things in the new deal that would allow them to enforce the existing laws so that Mexico couldn't dump crops. That did not get into this deal. That was traded off for guarantees in the Midwest about the auto manufacturing industry. Do you think that the deal that the president cut with Mexico is a good deal for Florida farmers or a bad deal for Florida farmers?
Well, look, I don't think it did as much as it could for Florida farmers. I think that's without question. I think he had a lot of other irons in the fire, and obviously, I mean, you know, he has run on the manufacturing, the automotive. I mean, that's just been a huge thing for him. So I think that was his priority.
But as governor, would you recommend that deal be ratified by the Senate, or would you oppose that deal?
I think it's too early because I haven't seen the final details yet, but you can bet your bottom dollar I'm going to be listening to Floridians about how that's going to affect them. And if it's going to affect them in a negative way, you know, I'll absolutely stand up and tell the president to reevaluate it.
I want to take a step back. Is this the way you thought this campaign would go? Is this the campaign you wanted to run when you thought about to yourself, I'd like to run for governor, I'd like to have a discussion of ideas? Is this what you thought it was going to be like?
Look, that's our politics. I mean, particularly on the left and the national press, I mean, they really just go with character assassination. I have people, 10 people every day will come up to me and say, thank you for running. I would never run in my life because of all the nonsense that's out there. And so that's just unfortunately where we're at. I mean, obviously, I wish we could just be talking about issues every day, but it is what it is, and you just got to go. I got thick skin. I'm a big boy. I'll be able to handle it.
But a lot of your campaign is about creating a fear of Andrew Gillum. Would you agree with that?
I would say it's telling Florida voters that Andrew's governorship will be bad for the economy. It'll be bad for people be able to keep their health insurance plans. It'll be bad for crime. I mean, look, he presides over a city that had the record number of murders last year. He signed an anti-police pledge. Those are just the facts. And so I think it's important to show the contrast of leadership and vision.
Do you think he's a bad person?
No.
Okay. All right, we can. Well, that's a good note.
He's a committed leftist. I mean, he believes it. In fact, there was an undercover video that came out from his campaign where one of his staffers is like, Andrew's with the crazy of the crazy on the left. So he is a true believer in left-wing politics. That's what he's done his whole life. I don't think it makes him a bad person. I just think it makes him bad for Florida.
Last thing I'm going to ask you, there's been a couple of times during the debate, and I know with a couple of interactions with reporters, never with me, but you've got a bit of a temper sometimes. Is that a problem for you?
It's not a temper. It's pushing back when I'm being smeared unfairly. And I'm just not going to stand for it. And if I have someone regurgitating a bunch of nonsense, I'm going to stand up for myself. I am not going to be cowed by political correctness, by the press when they're unfair. And granted, I mean, you've asked me tough questions. It's always been fair, but some people are not. And so I'm going to push back because I think people are sick of seeing people put themselves out there and getting unfairly smeared. And so I'm not going to let that happen to me.
All right, in the next half hour, we'll have our interview with Andrew Gillum, and later, the impact of young voters on this year's election when we come back.